Hello, welcome again to Talk Architecture Podcast. And I'm your host, Naziaty Yaacob. We have another episode, which is the final episode, and an important one with regard to the myth of the research framework on design thesis. Now, this is true experience. This is what I did wrong in the past. I had the opportunity to work with Kevin Mohd, who is extremely a gifted and talented professional, especially in teaching others. I think one of his biggest traits, biggest meaning the best traits that he has, is the ability to make people understand the problem. And he does that very well with the students. Now, in 2008 and 9 was the very first year that I worked with him. And we followed the usual approach, where about, at that time, I think 24 students in the design thesis year, which gradually we had more students. That's why we had units. But at that time, the maximum was about that number. 24 students with 24 different sites and 24 different topics. So all of them did not have similar sites. Sometimes there is a situation where a couple of students would like to do a side by side and some sort of a master planning among themselves, but only in relation to both sides. But apart from that, some students also do projects that are very on sites that are very, shall we say, has a lot of issues, like the Pudu jail site, which is the Lalaport site now, and trying to do it became more of a master planning, and maybe the Puduraya site as well. And it was a lot for the students because it could do with a group of people doing it and then coming up with a master plan. But, we have the student in front of us in 2008 and 9, and they will present their design thesis proposal, and they would propose the site. Sometimes we say that this site is not good enough for this proposal, and sometimes it ends up that there's quite a lot of speculative design and prototype design. So I promise you that I want to compare how, at that time, how we had to deal with the design thesis of a top student. We regard the ones that I'm going to talk about as a top student, and the ones later in 2018 to 2020, another top student, and how we had focused on context-specificity approach. Now, purely that came from Kevin Mohd, and I, as the full-time academic, I learned from him a lot. So it started in 2016, a batch, 2016, 2017, when we did the Kampong Baru and the Bukit Selon sites. There were two groups, and we started on context specificity only in 2016. So we're looking at a decade later of developing the design thesis approach for the unit, because we can do so, because I wasn't coordinating a whole year, but only specific unit. It's such a shame that this is not being, being the norm, or at least one unit is doing this context specificity approach in University of Malaya, where I used to work. But I mean, there could be others in different universities who have done this, but I'm not sure. I haven't really found out yet, but maybe we can see how this goes on. Now we have two students. In 2008, a student made a definition, like a problem statement, on um, a school design. So this person justified the choice of site, which is at a forest reserve area. This is quote unquote, understanding the way things are organized to sustain the web of life, using the school grounds as a teaching source, with a view to raise awareness about the natural environment, its complexity, and its vulnerability. So this school design places importance on engaging humans' multiple senses in the learning processes. So it's a contrast to the formal environmental education for children in Malaysia, which are often conducted in a featureless classroom, therefore ignoring the interaction with the natural physical environment. It is kind of like a small school, and we did insist on this design thesis student to actually understand what is being thought. And the student did what he did. It is a competent enough student, and he could not raise the level of the game. And somewhere like a few weeks before presentation, there were challenges that he did not want to meet. And I guess the way we run the studio, he could opt for that. There were many students who opt for not challenging themselves. There are details. There are some detailed design or some special studies of he can be a competent person and doing multi-senses sort of way. But I guess we were also kind of new to design thesis. Well, I was. And Kevin did not think that this person should get a high grade or an A. So I could understand why that was his opinion. And I know now better than ever that the design thesis curriculum that we had before, where we ourselves are kind of like trying to figure out what the heck the student do every week. Every week we have like group crit or interim crit, and we're always trying to figure out what actually is the student doing. And it doesn't help the student. It doesn't help the human being that it wants to be a graduate, because you can always do minimum, or you can just get comfortable and produce a set of drawings and hope that you get an A or a B based on the beautiful sets of drawings. But the real challenges that the student do, it's not evident. Or during the group crits or interim crit, you can see that they haven't challenged themselves. So it is more difficult for students later. And we can actually see the difference between the A's and the B's and the C's. Later in Master of Architecture, the lowest grade is B minus. So there is a big difference between the B and B minus is fail. So you can see the difference between a B and an A project. But you can see that the competency level has gone up. And I would think if you take the student from hypothetically, side by side, if they graduate, the one which doesn't do a prototype design or speculative design, the one that does context-specificity would be much more confident in going into the industry. They signed up for this unit, the students, In 2019, 2020, we had the Petaling Jaya Old Town, which is the cross-section road at Jalan Osman and the road going vertically. I forgot the name of the road, but at the junction there is the market, the wet market, which is like a community center. So this particular student had about like 10 to 12 design problems. He engaged on the environmental science. Okay, the one earlier I mentioned in 2008, 2009, they only engaged with sustainable science or the environmental science. And one idea of the multi-senses learning. Apart from that, it's kind of like only there's a few design problems. That's why people, when they look at design thesis, they would complain that it's not complex enough. And you would agree to that. So the site plays a big role, because the site where the person I mentioned earlier was in a clearing with a little road in the middle of the forest reserve, where they have like an institute for forestry. But this one is right smack in the middle of PJ Old Town, and it has a lot of issues. Community center, not only the market access, that it has to be a market, it has to have a capacity to expand the new design, and an urban farm upstairs, environmental science, how to ventilate, and how to make the circulation work. So there is certainly huge complex issues, complexities, I say, with regard to design, in which they come up with the detailed design sections and so on. You can have a look at it, at this work. I would copy the link in. Is in my blog. Now, complex specificity forces us to be the architect that we need to be in order for us to have all the skills. I mean, we could end up just being a design director or something in a company, but we still need to go on site. We still need to have the experience of having to be an associate, where we have to go for meetings and challenge the contractors or have to manage such meetings. And with a strong knowledge in how to solve problems in architecture school, it helps us to negotiate better the first year of being a fresh graduate in an architecture practice. We have had podcasts from, in fact, from the recent series on women leaders in architecture, or women architects in leadership roles in architecture. So we had that. And there was some of the discussion moved to how they need to find the right architecture company from shall we say, the after fifth year, after graduating. And that will help them to establish and be confident of themselves in the beginning. So when you have an idea that you know what to do, you have a framework of how to be an architect, and you try using the methods that you had when you were in school. And if it was criticized or it's not good enough, you will learn better. You will learn quicker, because you would compare what you had done and the approach that you had done in school, and then you would see that, okay, I need to learn this, or I need to learn that. And you could be much more articulate in explaining the needs that you need to have. Or you could do that on your own in the weekends or in the evenings. So communicating or being articulate in communicating is a skill that not necessarily everyone has. And it's a training that you have in the School of Architecture, where if you have a context-specificity project, a specific site, and we able to visit that site, your tutors visit the site with you, and we can see where you're coming from when you come up with challenges in the design problems. We can see where it's coming from. It's easier to learn that way. There is a basis to learning in which we can give proper feedback. If it's a speculative or a prototype, and you bank on the expertise of someone in education, say someone who is an expert in primary education, to give input, and you can't get an appointment with them, or you don't have enough information to actually, you're going to do a prototype of a classroom, for example. I would say that if I were to compare the example of the first project that I mentioned with a recent one in Kampong Kerinci project, it's a year before our PJ Old Town, where there is a student who did a primary school. That student had the benefit of the low income group and the pedestrian networking and the site next to it, and how she would make an experience for the student with the school, which she herself thrives on because it's not speculative. She would make easier decisions on how she could get the school to work in that neighborhood. That student did well as well in the Kampong Kerinci. And I could connect to the link as well in the explanation below. So I would say that there are some things in which a prototype school is limited, in which because the articulation is also the vocabulary, the architectural vocabulary that you will come up with once you challenge yourself as well for your project. There was something wrong when we were in 2008, 2009. I think some students got bored at the end because they felt they were not challenged enough as well. I know one who I mean, you will get comments from the tutors, like the same comments, so you wouldn't learn anything. So there was noticeably one student who took a break for a couple of weeks. Good on him. Maybe he needed that. But I feel that we did not, shall we say, contribute much challenges that they could have at that point of their lives. And I am doing this. In conclusion, I'm doing this, because I discovered this from my experience and I need to relate this. And the best I can do now is to podcast about it, because I'm not sure that I could write up a whole book or a whole article that is good enough. That's just a matter of time if I could do that. But I think this is a subject that is so interesting and could be picked up by others as well. I mean, knowledge, when we receive knowledge, we understand something, and just happened that I'm in the architectural field, we need to actually convey it, because the insight is too great. I used to think that, oh, fine, this unit is doing sustainable science and this unit is doing heritage. And I find a lot of problems with those units. And I don't think that when we say, fine, the students will make do with these units and off they go. When they graduate, they go into the industry. I don't think that is fine when we didn't have even a debate at the level of the department of the school amongst ourselves on what constitute the best way to teach students. And it could be one reason where the lecturers feel that it's too hard for them to do it. Context specificity is something that is very consensual, meaning it is so much a logical process that warrants its own refinement, in which you could look at what are the problems that the industry is saying when they have fresh graduates. What is it that the skills that they're lacking? What is it that they're not able to do? And most of the issues is to problem solve, because that's what's the basic nature of architecture, architects or architectural professional is about. And you can't run away from the fact that you're developing a site or several sites at once, and that you're the professional that look at design and a bigger scale and in the more detail. Yes, you can do the interior, and you can also get an interior designer to do that. Yes, you can do the planning, and you can also get the planner to help with certain legislation and problems. But you are the architect, and that word itself is like telling you the purpose of what you are. And if you can't command eventually, I mean, how many years would it take before you can command eventually in the architecture company? When I look at that jump between school and going into an architectural company, and I've been doing my sabbatical in one, and I see some of them give up, the students of architecture. Some of them became associates, so they kept their cool, and they kept their head down and do whatever. And they could be an associate quicker, but many of them left the architectural company because they felt that they lacked that certain confidence to fight, to actually show their worth, to be the A player, so to speak. They could potentially be an A player, but maybe they are A players in a different environment, because this is a particular company that I'm looking at with a particular set of politics. Sometimes you you just can't find a way, to make yourself go in an upwards trajectory to get a better position, better pay, but sometimes it's just politics. But apart from that, you're the one in control. And I truly believe that, as a former academic, that there is something wrong if I didn't do it right in terms of creating a curriculum that the student can gain confidence from. I know I come from different generation or a different way of being taught, and I didn't get what the students did with a studio master like Kevin Matlow. But I think it's good to just give it a go, and see that where we could take architectural education actually. Because if the profession is diminishing and becomes diluted, and it's no more even the skeleton of what the profession is before, and that other designers can do the design that architects do, and even computers or AI for that matter, then what is an architect? I mean, what are we doing, telling ourselves that is an architectural curriculum? Because we didn't defend the architecture curriculum. We didn't debate and find out what is it to be an architect. Because design problem is, people say, architects not just about drawings. They have to do all sorts of things, legislation, contracts. No, the problem solver, the architect as the problem solver, could be better at solving legislation issues, could be better at solving contracts, could be much articulated in communication, could be a better designer, could be so much better if they know exactly the core competency that they're doing, and that is being recognized by other professionals in the industry. Well, time's up, and I hope that this three-part series of the myth of the research framework in design thesis could be put to bed in a way, other than if I were to do anything anymore, it could be a publication of it, but I don't know when that will be. So thank you very much for listening to this three-part episode of three-part series on 3 episodes. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.